It started as a love story, one filled with stolen moments and secret promises, but it ended in blood and tragedy. Daniel was desperate to protect the woman he loved, Sophia, from a future she didn't want, a life controlled by her dominating mother, Clara. But what began as love twisted into obsession, and in the dark corners of Daniel's mind, he convinced himself there was only one way to save her. What followed was a shocking crime so brutal and unnecessary that it left an entire community in disbelief and tore apart the lives of everyone. Sophia met Daniel at a friend's birthday party. She hadn't planned to go that evening, but her friend insisted. Daniel was standing in the corner of the room, quiet and observing. He wasn't the type to draw attention, but there was something about his calm presence that made Sophia curious. They exchanged a few words that night, and something clicked. Sophia was 23 years old, and in the final year of her studies. She was kind-hearted and full of dreams, but lived under the heavy shadow of her mother, Clara. Clara was a single mother who had raised Sophia with strict rules. She valued tradition and was determined to marry Sophia into a wealthy family, believing it was the best way to secure her daughter's future. For years, Clara's word was law in their household, and Sophia rarely had the courage to question it. Daniel, on the other hand, had a rougher upbringing. He was 26 and worked long hours at a local repair shop. Life had been unkind to him. He grew up in a broken home and had learned to survive on his own. Despite his struggles, he had a quiet resilience that drew Sophia to him. He listened when she talked, made her feel understood, and gave her a sense of freedom she hadn't known before. Their relationship grew quickly, though they had to keep it hidden. Clara would never approve of someone like Daniel, who didn't come from wealth or status. The secrecy added an intensity to their relationship. They met in parks, coffee shops, and places where no one would recognize them. Every stolen moment felt precious, but it also made their love feel fragile. Daniel worried about how long they could keep it up, and Sophia feared what her mother would do if she found out. Clara's influence over Sophia was overwhelming. She dictated every aspect of her daughter's life, from what she studied to who she spent time with. Clara often reminded Sophia that her future depended on her obedience. When Clara began talking about arranging a marriage for Sophia, the pressure became unbearable. Sophia tried to reason with her mother, but it was like speaking to a wall. Clara dismissed her feelings, saying love was a luxury they couldn't afford. Sophia confided in Daniel about her mother's plans. Her voice trembled as she explained that Clara had already found a potential match, a wealthy businessman from their community. Daniel felt a wave of anger rise within him. The thought of losing Sophia to a man she didn't love filled him with despair. He tried to reassure her, but deep down he knew their situation was becoming desperate. Despite the challenges, they continued to meet in secret. Each time they parted, Daniel felt the growing weight of their situation. Sophia was trapped in a life she didn't want, and he couldn't stand by and watch it happen. What started as love was turning into an obsession. For Daniel, the idea of losing Sophia wasn't just heartbreaking, it was unthinkable. Sophia's life became a prison after her mother, Clara, announced her plans for the arranged marriage. Clara had always been controlling, but this was different. Sophia wasn't allowed to leave the house without supervision, her phone was taken away, and even her interactions with friends were limited. Clara wanted complete control to ensure Sophia didn't do anything to jeopardize the marriage. Sophia found small ways to stay connected with Daniel. She managed to slip handwritten notes to a trusted friend, who would pass them along to him. In her messages, she described how suffocating her life had become. She wrote about how she couldn't eat or sleep, how the thought of marrying a stranger made her feel hopeless, and how much she missed him. Daniel read every word with growing anger. The announcement of the wedding date was the final straw. Sophia's family was already making preparations, and Clara was proudly telling relatives about the match. Sophia begged her mother to reconsider, but Clara wouldn't hear it. She dismissed her daughter's feelings as childish and accused her of being ungrateful for the sacrifices she had made. To Clara, this marriage wasn't just about tradition, it was her way of ensuring Sophia's future, even if it meant ignoring what Sophia wanted. When Sophia told Daniel about the wedding date, he felt a storm of emotions: helplessness, anger, and an overwhelming sense of loss. He couldn't bear the thought of Sophia being forced into a loveless marriage while he stood by, unable to stop it. He wanted to do something, anything, to change the situation, but he didn't know how. As the days passed, Daniel's anger turned into obsession. He replayed the situation over and over in his mind, and each time he arrived at the same conclusion: Clara was the root of their problems. If it weren't for her, he and Sophia could be happy. The more he thought about it, the more it felt like Clara wasn't just controlling Sophia's life, she was destroying both of theirs. The idea of confronting Clara crossed his mind, but he knew it wouldn't work. Clara wasn't the type to listen, and Daniel doubted she would ever see him as anything more than an obstacle. He began to entertain darker thoughts, ideas he would have once dismissed as unthinkable. He tried to push them away, but they kept coming back, stronger each time. One night, Daniel made a decision that changed everything. Sitting alone in his small apartment, he told himself that this wasn't just about him, it was about protecting Sophia. He convinced himself that what he was planning wasn't wrong, but necessary. The thought scared him, but it also gave him a sense of purpose. For the first time in weeks, he felt like he had control over the situation. What he didn't realize was how far that control would take him and how much destruction it would leave in its wake. After making the decision to take action, Daniel's mind shifted into a state of cold calculation. He knew he couldn't act impulsively. This would require careful planning. He began by studying Clara's routine. From Sophia's notes and his own observations, he pieced together Clara's daily habits. She left the house at specific times, often ran errands in the evening, and spent most of her nights alone. Daniel started to spend more time near Clara's neighborhood. He made sure to stay out of sight, watching from a distance as she moved through her day. He noted the time she left her home, the stores she frequented, and even which lights she turned off at night. His obsession with detail grew, fueled by the belief that every piece of information would help him avoid getting caught. The plan became clearer with each passing day. He decided to act on a night when Clara would be home alone. He chose a time when the streets were quiet, knowing the silence would work in his favor. Daniel thought about different ways to confront her, but settled on the one he believed would be quickest and most effective: a knife. He told himself it was the only way to ensure things didn't spiral out of control. He began gathering the items he thought he would need. He bought a pair of gloves to avoid leaving fingerprints, a dark hoodie to blend into the night, and the sharpest knife he could find at a local store. Each purchase felt like a step closer to freedom, though a part of him still felt uneasy. But Daniel drowned out those doubts with the thought of Sophia. He reminded himself of the life they could have together if only Clara were out of the picture. On the night of the planned attack, Daniel prepared with an unsettling calm. He rehearsed his steps in his mind, imagining every detail. He told himself there was no turning back now. Clara's existence was the barrier between him and the life he wanted with Sophia. That belief had taken root so deeply that it overshadowed everything else: his morals, his fear, and even his love. As he walked toward Clara's house, the streets were eerily quiet. The cold air bit at his skin, but he didn't notice. His focus was absolute. Each step felt heavy, as though the weight of his decision was pressing down on him, but he didn't stop. When he reached the house, he stood in the shadows for a moment, taking in the scene. The house was dark except for a single light in the living room. He knew Clara was there. For a moment, Daniel hesitated. A sliver of doubt crept into his mind, urging him to stop and turn back. But then he thought about Sophia, about the life she was being forced into and the pain she had endured. His anger reignited, fueling his determination. He stepped forward, his movements deliberate and quiet. clutching the knife tightly in his hand. When he was close enough, the moment of confrontation came faster than he anticipated. Clara turned slightly, as if sensing someone behind her. Her eyes widened in shock as she saw him, but before she could react, Daniel lunged. What happened next was chaotic and brutal. Clara screamed, the sound piercing the stillness of the night, and tried to fight back. She clawed at him, her strength surprising him, but Daniel was relentless. In the frenzy, he struck again and again, consumed by a mix of rage and desperation. Blood spattered across the room, staining the once pristine furniture. Clara's screams faded into silence as she collapsed onto the floor, her lifeless body lying in a pool of blood. The room was now filled with an eerie stillness, broken only by Daniel's heavy breathing. He stood there for a moment, staring at what he had done. His mind raced, torn between triumph and horror. This was supposed to be the solution, the act that would free Sophia from her mother's control. But the reality of the violence, the finality of Clara's lifeless form, was overwhelming. Daniel quickly wiped down surfaces, trying to remove any traces of himself from the scene. He knew the house would soon be swarming with police, and he needed to leave before anyone discovered what had happened. He slipped out the way he came, disappearing into the night, leaving behind a home filled with evidence of his crime. Daniel returned to his apartment, his clothes stained with blood and his hands trembling. He stripped off the gloves and hoodie, shoving them into a trash bag. His mind was racing, but he tried to calm himself, focusing on what he needed to do next. He washed the blood from his hands and scrubbed his fingernails, but no amount of water could wash away the weight of what he had done. The next morning, the news broke. Clara's murder was the lead story, and the gruesome details shocked the community. Police were investigating, and neighbors described seeing an unfamiliar figure near the house that night. Sophia was devastated. Her mother's sudden and violent death left her in a state of shock and guilt. She had begged Daniel to help her escape the arranged marriage, but she had never wanted this. She had no idea he was capable of something so horrific. As the investigation progressed, Daniel became the prime suspect. His relationship with Sophia was no longer a secret, and witnesses had seen him lurking near Clara's home in the weeks leading up to the murder. The police brought him in for questioning, and despite his attempts to appear calm, the evidence against him was overwhelming. DNA on the gloves he had discarded matched his own, and Clara's blood was found on his discarded clothing. In court, Daniel showed little emotion. He believed he had done what was necessary to protect Sophia, but his justification meant nothing to the jury. Sophia, who had once loved him, now looked at him with a mix of disgust and heartbreak. She testified against him, recounting how she had confided in him about her struggles, but had never wanted harm to come to her mother. Her words sealed his fate. The trial revealed a heartbreaking twist. Clara had recently begun to reconsider the arranged marriage. Private notes found in her belongings showed that she was planning to speak with Sophia about canceling the arrangement. Clara had been strict, but deep down, she loved her daughter and wanted her to be happy. Daniel's actions had been not only brutal but also unnecessary. Daniel was sentenced to life in prison without parole. From his cell, he thought about Sophia and the life they had dreamed of together. His obsession had destroyed everything they had, leaving him alone with nothing but regret. Sophia, meanwhile, struggled to rebuild her life, haunted by the tragedy that had unfolded. The story became infamous, a chilling reminder of how love can turn toxic and how desperation can lead to unthinkable acts. In the end, Daniel's actions didn't save Sophia, they shattered her world. And as he sat in his prison cell, he realized too late that his greatest crime wasn't just against Clara, but against the very person he claimed to love.